Next we'll have University of Maryland, Dr. Stewart.
Good afternoon. I, of course, join the other presenters today in thanking the organizers of this session. It's always refreshing to get the same topics dealt with in so many different ways, as we've just seen in the first two speakers in this afternoon. I'm sorry that I couldn't make it throughout the morning. I was on my very best behavior, having organized a TA to take my class this morning, only to find that she has the flu now, and so we'll stay far apart here. In some respects, what I'm going to suggest today, or say today, will sound a bit like a broken record. A lot of the themes that I will want to address, I can be relatively brief about, and perhaps save us a little bit of time so we get back on schedule, in part because, indeed, many of the issues have come up rather repeatedly. I'm addressing today, been asked to address the issue of just what, in terms of the interfaith and intercultural dialogue activities of the Gulen Movement, what do these amount to in terms of their roles for peace building? And I think there are two sorts of themes that I could mention more, I'm sure, but two themes that I've been following up since I joined some colleagues for one of the Turkish trips under the auspices of the Forum and the Gulen Movement. Probably like you, who have joined on that trip, it was a remarkable, it was especially remarkable in terms of just how they got things accomplished. Often schedules would be upset, and I would find that nonetheless, without panic and so on, the volunteers were able to make adjustments in a very quick order. And as I've been reflecting on this since I got back here now a couple of years ago, I have concluded, and this is not unique to me, it turns out, I've concluded that two themes are useful for us to appreciate the Gulen Movement. One is the notion of civil society and civil society initiatives. As a matter of fact, I had proposed talking about this at the upcoming December meetings in California, and I wasn't able to go there, but there are two or three people who are following this theme up as well. The other theme that I think has struck me is the notion of social capital, a theme that is especially prominent these days along with civil society initiatives in not only anthropology, but economics, political science, and sociology as well. As my little biographical note mentions, I'm an anthropologist. I work especially in on the topic of new religious movements, and frequently, not always, but frequently I deal with a rather depressing topic, but one necessary to address, that of fundamentalisms. But as has been pointed out once or more today, one of the refreshing things about the Gulen Movement is the fact that it is not a fundamentalist movement with the various rigidities, hierarchy, and control that are features associated with fundamentalisms. And as I say, it's rather refreshing to look at a movement that has a lot of newness to it. Certainly the Sufi movement, especially that derived from Rumi, goes back many centuries. But Gulen, I think, has innovated in some rather remarkable ways. I suppose that both what I'm attributing to him and his movement, the notion of a civil society initiative, the extension then of civil rights, but also civil responsibilities to all the people in one's polity, is a major contribution that Gulen has made in his own home country and in cognate countries in Central and Southwest Asia. Likewise, the struggle, the jihad, as I think Professor Davies and others have mentioned this morning, still is a useful notion for us, especially as it relates to the struggle to extend these social responsibilities and freedoms and liberties and so on within the country of Turkey. There is a local aspect to the Gulen movement in terms of Gulen's success in doing this movement, pulling it off, especially in the context of educational systems and the schools that a number of us have seen and been impressed by. There is with the movement an emphasis on leading by example and working within the system to extend the notion of oneself and one's brotherhood to others who formerly have been denied such courtesies. Within the country, to the country of Turkey then, certainly as one of the parts of the Dar al-Islam, the abode of peace, but also the abode of submission. Certainly, Gulen has made a contribution there prominently, but I think he's also made a special contribution in terms of the extension of this notion of jihad to the rest of the world, but not in terms of the abode of war, as often referred to, the Dar al-Harb, but rather an intermediate position, which, although ancient within Islamic circles, perhaps needed to be revived, as it turns out, maybe only Gulen was able to do. Let me read a passage from a recent document that says, that is, instead of using a dichotomous view of classic Islamic jurisprudence, the Dar al-Harb, a country of war, and Dar al-Islam, the country of Islam and submission, Gulen movement uses a new terminology, and it comes in several different flavors and terms. One is Dar al-Hizmet, and indeed I think our earlier speaker mentioned the importance of the notion of the abode of service, and I think that's probably one of the most prominent characteristics that the outsider notes when visiting Turkey and seeing the operation of the Gulen movement, the Dar al-Hizmet. As a result, the concepts of, and I won't keep saying dar, but rather I'll do the translation, the country of treaty and covenant, the country of security, the country of peace, the country of necessity, and so on. They have joined together to come into operation in a way that, as I say, is precedented in Islam, but especially in our era, too seldom represented. And as I say, Gulen is the one who seems to have been remarkably successful in this regard. The little passage that I'm quoting from concludes, from the perspective of the Gulen movement then, no passage in the Quran or in the Bible should be interpreted to suggest that any group of people, by virtue of their beliefs and cultural practices, live outside the relationship with God. There is a way then in which Gulen and the movement achieves, well, we can think of several different idioms, one that was mentioned this morning, not just simply talking the talk, but walking the walk. There's an action and an activity, and a successful activity, that is so distinctive in terms of the variety of movements that are concerned with the extension of peace around the world. One of the things that the Gulen movement does is it actually achieves some of these steps towards these civil society initiatives. I mentioned the word capital. Clearly, most of us, at least those of us who have been unfortunate enough to take introductory economics or something like this, know the base notion of capital, usually monetized in its imagery and so on. Some more recent terms, however, are social capital, where the emphasis is on looking at often the kinship or quasi-kinship notions, behavioral terms. Cultural capital, the emphasis on a symbolic inventory and messages that in fact inculcate and promulgate in moral terms the ideal culture. At least one scholar working recently on this matter of social and cultural capital has in fact coined the newer label spiritual capital to emphasize, as was remarked this morning, the importance of the religious dimension in successful extensions of civil society and related activities. Now, the Gulen Movement is very successful in terms of its what in Christian circles I suppose would be called its missionizing activities, a struggle to build the trust not only within the country and the subgroups within Turkey, but internationally as well. As I said, he and his followers walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Another imagery that might be more appealing to some of you if you've taken that other course at the university on physics, the conversion of some ideal potential to the real world of success, that is making the potential kinetic, I think our physicists would say. And what are these mechanisms whereby this is accomplished? One is clearly the educational activities. Perhaps most obvious and in Turkey itself, as well as in a number of the countries nearby, but as also pointed out, the extension of high quality educational opportunities now variously in many places in the world. I think that in the United States, perhaps the most visible mechanism for building this peace based on establishing trusting relationships of a social capital nature between individuals, between peoples, and between nations is the mechanism that brings us here today, the notion of the forums that are found in so many of the cities in this country, and the activities of the forums. Symposia like this, as well as other activities that are less formally organized, but nonetheless, in fact, represent this emphasis, and Professor Kim talked about the need to distinguish between the dialogic and the dialectical. Certainly the emphasis that Gulen places on dialogue, free and open and largely unfettered discourse and discussion. One of the things that it didn't surprise me overly much, but I certainly was impressed in the visits that we took to Turkey, and since arriving back, the openness to discussing very delicate topics in terms of different creedal statements, different religious activities, different political consequences of those, and so on. I think that one of the mechanisms that within Turkey that now has a counterpart in our country as well is the journal, what is the largest journal in Turkey, Zaman. It has, of course, the English page, once a week, I believe it is. And again, representing a really high mark, a high view of journalistic integrity and so on. So it's not only the biggest newspaper, but it is arguably the best newspaper, certainly right up there with the best newspapers, probably in the world and not only in Turkey. Another mechanism, especially effective in the United States, is another of the organizers that brings us here, the Rumi clubs. These often, if not always, I think all the ones I know of are at universities, and do a very effective job of extending the notions of and putting a real human face on Islam and Turkish culture. for people, Americans, who in general are, and I believe I talked to a couple of you earlier today, who are largely ignorant about Islam and so on. And I think the mechanism of the clubs has been very important. And of course, I've mentioned that another one that has perhaps been especially effective for now, literally dozens of people from the DC area who have been fortunate enough to travel from here to Turkey, and again, to put the human face on the other, so that no longer stranger, no longer other, but friend and brothers. Certainly, we can see that the Gulen Movement, because of its manifest successes, does represent an effective role model, both within the country of Turkey itself and in Islamic context, but also internationally, a role model to be emulated by others. And I fully expect that in the next few decades we're going to encounter more and more, not only Gulen movements themselves, but other movements that in fact pattern themselves after the Gulen movement. We've talked, and let me try to conclude here, we've talked a lot today about the importance of the word and the, not only the word, the concept of peace and so on. And I think we've heard another theme here that is worth noting, must go along with the notion of peace. Because peace without the effective concerns with and development of justice, in fact, is tyranny. I think we have no better example than the one we all learned about in high school, probably Pax Romana, several centuries, 4 to 6 centuries of tyranny. Yes, it was peaceful, but it was unjust. And the remarkable thing I think that Gulen has done in terms of its roles in extending or building the notion of peace is the manner in which, through these various mechanisms of education and forums and clubs and trips and newspapers and so on, has been able to combine, to join in the way that is necessary, a concern, a deeply felt concern for not only peace, brotherhood, and love, but also the justice that is necessary mechanism for ensuring that the peace is not just tyranny, but in fact genuine peace in the terms that Gulen has been so remarkable in inspiring us to. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. What a great segue to our next panelist, who shall discuss that very subject with us, the idea and notion of peace. And after this panelist, we will then take a coffee break, and then we will return to this room and this space for questions and answers then. We'll move to Q&A at the very end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairwoman. I'm very relieved to hear that you only have a little bit to bridge to your coffee break. So it's only me between you and your coffee break. I would like to talk a little bit about peace as horizon of tolerance and dialogue, because I think it is important on this day to analyze a bit more what Hoja Effendi Fethullah Gulen has to say about this notion of peace, and also to broaden that notion a bit. So let me tell you the 4 paragraphs of my talk so that you can follow the amount of time that still is left until you can move from here. First, I will sketch how for Muslims, and of course Fethullah Gulen is a Muslim, the notion of peace is immediately connected to their religion, since in Arabic the word for peace, salam, is derived from the same root as the word Islam. In the second place, I will try to make clear that although Gulen's phrases about Islam as a religion of peace may sound not very realistic sometimes, it is based on an analysis of the root causes of violence. And I will show, following my great colleague, Jesuit scholar Thomas Michel, how this analysis of the 3 root causes of violence prompted Gulen to take 3 initiatives to fight these root causes. And the 3 main causes of violence were answered by the 3 main initiatives in the so-called Gulen Movement. In the third place, I want to show that an adequate understanding of peace as horizon of tolerance and dialogue requires a more encompassing notion of peace than just absence of war. And finally, and in that sense I come back, I think, to where my colleague sister Arlene Epic began, I want to show how the spiritual side of the notion of peace, not only inner peace in the sense of tranquility of mind, but also peace with God, is connected with the religious inspiration that moves Gulen in his initiatives for tolerance and dialogue